right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling and broadcast. Monte The Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV, straight out of Ronkonkoma, Long Island. Abe, thank you for showing up on this weekend and taking your time out.
Of course, brother.
And to the right, special guest, went to the bullpen, Mr. Boston, Mr. President, Phil DeCesare. How are you, buddy?
Quite a surreal moment here.
How did
Monty.
it feel to get the call? Well, there's a couple of things going on here.
Yeah.
You got the late call,
Literally
literally minutes late.
Yep.
And then on the couch is probably, I don't know, top 10 most iconic pro wrestling figures in the history of pro wrestling.
Yeah.
So now you have to step in
Yeah.
and do an interview with this guy.
It's a good thing I know a lot about him, and good thing I've watched him over the years too.
Did you? So Magnum, we were talking earlier, we'll run through our shtick, but we want to thank you for joining us. How was your day at the big event today?
It was great, not for the reason I thought it was going to be great, but it was great because I got to connect with some folks that I haven't seen in a really long time. And you can't ever take anything for granted about when you're going to see someone again, much less when you see someone you haven't seen in 35 or 40 years. And these events always bring people from all over the United States, and I saw some faces today that meant a whole lot to me back in the day and over the years, and I've totally lost contact with. So being able to make some of those connections again was really cool.
Does that affect you when your brotherhood, they pass away? I mean, how do you handle that? Because I always envision the pro wrestling world as being this really close circle family. And, you have your regular family, of course, which is absolutely important. But now you have the secondary family, and it's like double the fun, double the pain. Is that maybe a good reference?
It is. It's so funny you should say that, because I was just telling my son that very thing this afternoon, that the relationships that we developed, traveling up and down the road together, experiencing all the things we did, the highs, the lows, good times, bad times, all the trials and tribulations and everything, somehow knit you together tighter than most families, because it's a 24/7 kind of bond. It's not just even a normal family and dad's going off to work or mom or both are going off to work, and they interact with folks during the given periods of time. We traveled together, we worked out together, we worked in the ring together, and it was all encompassing. So to your point, you have these bonds, and they're so intense that you can not speak to somebody for 10, 20 years, and the minute you do, you pick right back up where you left off with the same emotion, the same connection, the same common love of what we once did together. It's just really I'm sure the military is probably very similar for people that have served and served our country and done things like that level of intensity. Though you take guys that have 5, 10, 20-year careers in our industry, you're really engulfed in other people's lives. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you lose them. My best friend in the world was American Dream Dusty Rhodes, and he passed away on my birthday. And the last time that I saw him was in New York at the big event, and my son then, who's traveling with me now, was a little boy, and he got to meet this guy that he'd heard his dad talk about, and spend about 4 or 5 hours sitting and listening to him talk and listening to he and I interact. And then 6 months later, he was gone, and he passed away on my birthday. And those leave marks in you that you don't ever forget. It's just a constant reminder of how precious every moment we have in life is.
Well, again, it's very hard. Like in regular life, right? You meet people, you work with them, you move on to another job. You mentioned the military. It's hard to keep up and keep everybody in your life because you're busy. Everybody's busy. Do you ever feel guilty, like, man, I should have reached out to that guy a little more? That type of thing.
Well, my situation is a little. Everybody's situations are all different, but mine is even a little bit more different even yet in that I was at the top of my game at 27 years old, had a career-ending automobile accident that in the blink of an eye changed my whole career path and everything I thought I was going to do in life. And yet, so people saw that, felt sorry for me that I didn't get to achieve my goals or didn't get to do the things that were forecasted for me that have been talked about over many times over the years. But they don't realize that the greatest loss for me wasn't the performing in the ring. It was that interaction with the people that I loved. And it wasn't that they didn't want to interact with me, but I could no longer take part and be involved in it to the capacity that I was. And I was still a very young man that had to go find his way and make another path. So, but those feelings, that intense, and only almost about 7 years in the ring, and the friendships that I developed, the ones that are all still alive today, are just as strong as they were 37 years ago.
And I should mention your son. Obviously, everybody knew what a good-looking guy Magnum TA is and what an idol he was. It looks like your son's right behind you there, buddy.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And of course, I feel the same way. And I've been blessed to raise 7 children, and he and his twin sister are the last 2 of the 7. And of all the children, he's got the most, I guess, desire-driven feelings that kind of related to the same things that I had as a young man. So I wouldn't be so surprised if a couple years down the road he might be able to throw his hat into that same equation, because it's just today it's a different business. It's a different animal. It's much more calculated and things that you can do to take a path to try to get there. When I was trying to break into the business, you might as well say you wanted to go walk on and play with the NFL, because it was that closely guarded of a thing. There wasn't a channel, there wasn't wrestling schools, there wasn't these ways that you could set this as some kind of career path of something you might want to do. And today, in reality, you can do that. I mean, you can at least get a shot, a real shot, to see measurably whether you've got what it takes or not. And you didn't have that ability 30, 40 years ago.
Phil, I think you got to run off about 100 photos of him real quick. Let's get some signatures.
Yeah,
just
look
get,
at that,
Just
huh?
get prepped, right?
Yeah, man.
What
Wow.
do we get for those? Like 100 a pop? Not bad.
Probably,
Right? Run 1,000.
There you go.
I would like to thank the band that sings a theme song for Monte The Pharaoh and Jimmy Pharaoh, who lives in Florida right now, along with his partner Bart Griggs, are part of the band Wisteria Hall. Wisteria Hall sings such great... What did you say?
Bartman.
Look at you.
Bartman.
You're making them proud right now. Well
do
done,
it.
sir. Wisteria Hall sings such great songs as In My Dreams, This Life, Not Far Behind, Here Comes the Rain. You can find their music on the Wisteria Hall YouTube page. Hit that.
Like button?
There you go. Go to Spotify, download Apple Music, Reverb Nation. If you didn't know it, you are watching Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monte The Pharaoh. Catch us on the Monte The Pharaoh YouTube page. Where are you?
Where are we?
You're lost. Like and subscribe. Go to Facebook Live. Listen, you're coming out of the bullpen. I get it. It's all good.
Arm's a little
It's
stiff.
a little stiff. Hear us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Twitch TV. If you're lucky enough to live in New York, where you'll get the reduced version of this broadcast with this icon on Channel 115 every Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. or Saturday morning with your cereal and coffee at 11 a.m. and Channel 20 on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. We're also part of a network called Intuitive. That's a free network. Check this out, Magnum. It's a up and growing Netflix. It's a free app. It's INTUITIVE network. It's got documentaries. It's got comedy. It's got everything, And the head of it, Monte The Pharaoh.
Let's get the best at the job.
That's right. We'll be right back with this icon in just a few short minutes.
Maggie Man.
Sir?
Ah,
Manscaped?
uh-huh.
Have you tried the new equipment that's been sent?
I'm afraid because it says weed whacker. I'm scared.
Maven, Manscaped, what are you thinking about
Love it.
Manscaped, dude?
Love it.
What do you use it for?
Necessity. What don't I use it for? Put it this way. The only hair I have on my entire body is these eyebrows.
Yeah.
That you see. These
Wow.
caterpillars racing to the middle of my nose. That's it.
That is it.
That's all I have. And that's all I want.
That's the
So
big-
Manscaped is a
You-
must.
We were talking before the show. There's nothing worse than just hair.
Yeah.
Right? Hair on a woman, hair on a man. It's just bad.
Absolutely. And it's the one thing that the older I get, it starts growing more in unwanted areas.
Absolutely.
I hate it.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
Just going to go out there.
Oh boy.
Go for it.
You're doing a deed.
Yes.
Again, I don't want you to have to admit this because we, as men, we try not to admit this. But if you're going to
Oh,
go
I
do
know
the deed
where-
on a
I
woman,
know
would
where
you
he's
rather
going.
have her be hairless or a little hair, racing stripe, or
Racing stripe.
full retro bush?
Well,
Racing stripe.
Retro Bush is out.
Yes, thank you.
Retro Bush is out.
Yeah.
I don't mind a small, well manicured landing strip. Every now and then, if it's completely, and I'm talking like baby's ass bald, then I start. Where is that pedophilia line? I don't want to
Wow.
wander into that.
That's
thought
very
of it like
interesting.
that.
I never thought about that. You're a
Wow.
smart dude. Holy shit.
So if the landing strip is clean enough for the plane to go in smoothly, you're cool with that.
If the landing strip is like I said, well manicured,
Yeah,
you can see both sides. It's not
Like blinking lights on both sides of that.
I
landing?
just don't. I don't want. I don't want the shrubbery going off into unwanted areas on that as well.
Gotcha. Oh,
Yeah,
look
but-
what you found. Ooh.
I got to be all honest though. Hey, the older I get though, I don't think I can be as
I found it. I found
have
it.
you ever gone down there and she slowly brings down the underwear? Then
What is
retro? Just,
Absolutely.
You're like, whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm
like
46,
it
of
pops
course.
out?
Do you like walk out or what do you do?
No, I muster through. I muster up the courage to get
finish
He's
through.
a trooper. Yeah. He's a trooper. Gotta give him an A.
Yeah, not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah,
There you go.
I hear you.
There you
Listen,
go.
I couldn't
Super
say.
Bush.
I couldn't say. Well, if you have the same beliefs as Maven, does Manscaped could help you?
Absolutely.
The weed whacker.
Absolutely.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that I may have to, go in a room, close the door, and hang out with the weed whacker for a little while.
Yeah, I think you're a retro guy, aren't you?
I like 70s adult films, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
But
only
with that,
Ron
we're going to take a
Jeremy,
quick
Batman.
commercial break, and we'll be
Anyway.
back with this wrestling icon, Maven.
We will see you in a drop kick second.
Drop kick. All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast. Monte The Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV. Magnum TA, thank you, sir, for joining us.
Pleasure, guys.
It is an honor. So, how's your health?
Health is good. When you have twins that are 16 years old and you're full-time employed, you don't have any choice but to be good. You got responsibilities, things to do that aren't going to happen if you don't do them, and you stay in the game.
That's great. That's great. We were talking before you got in. We were just spitballing, and Buzz Sawyer's name came up. Are you on the Buzz Sawyer I burnt you list?
I am on the financially burnt list, absolutely. And I told that story a little bit on the Dark Side of the Ring episode I did this past year. And yeah, The Undertaker and I both have common bonds with Buzz Sawyer. And but in retrospect, you take a guy like me who had never had a wrestling lesson one, traveled from my home of Virginia 3,000 miles away to run Buzz down in Portland, Oregon.
Wow.
Worked out in the ring one time with Buzz and Princess Victoria for about 2 hours. And started wrestling the next night live on television for a promoter, Don Owens, who was told that I had been working in the business for 6 months for Bill Watts by Buzz Sawyer. And I suddenly found myself in the game, working full-time, learning on-the-job experience, not being able to let anyone know that I didn't know what I was doing, and having to learn it all live. So did I get burnt for some money? Yeah, I did. I got burnt for some money that was very substantial for back in that time. But the fact of the matter is, had all the circumstances not played out the way they did, the story probably wouldn't come out the same way.
But you got the end result, so you're like, it's over. When you did get burnt, because I believe you borrowed it from your parents, the money?
My grandfather.
Your grandfather. When you got burned for it, were they upset with you, or were they like, okay, look, people take advantage? Like, how was that conversation?
It was never mentioned because I got in, because the goal was just to get in. They never knew all the circumstance that it was a burn, for the simple fact that I was in the game, and we had had it portrayed to us that a wrestling license to get in the business with this clandestine world of wrestling was a huge expense, when in reality that wasn't the truth. But in their minds, because they weren't smartened up to the way the business worked, no one knew all that story until way down the road. It wasn't something, and because there wasn't no expectation of it needing to be repaid or anything. My grandfather believed in me. I'd worked with him from the time I was old enough to pick up a shovel and an axe and do things around his farm, and he believed in me and knew that that if I put my mind to it and was 100% committed, that I was going to be successful. So that same grandfather, along with my other grandfather, got to see me 5 years later selling out in Norfolk Scope wrestling Ric Flair for the World's Heavyweight Championship. So there was no bad investment in his mind.
And it's quite the story, right? He got to see the fruits of his assistance in your career. It's a pretty incredible story. At some point in your career, you were in Florida Championship Wrestling, correct?
1 year into the business, I was at Florida Championship Wrestling. Yes.
Did you have a relationship with, I think Eddie Graham was still running the organization at that point?
I loved Eddie Graham. His son, Mike, had come to San Antonio where I was working for Joe Blanchard doing a guest spot. And he and I met up, immediately had some kind of crazy bond, like we were like brothers disconnected with a different mother or something. It was just weird. And he liked me so much that he went home, told his dad, hey, got this big good-looking kid down in Texas that needs to come to Florida and learn the ropes. And he did. He took me on the road with he and his dad. I flew in Eddie's private plane with him. Eddie would stand in the back with me every night, watch the matches with me, talk to me through the whole thing, explain to me what was good, what wasn't good, about psychology, why you did this, why you did that. And it was an education that you couldn't pay for $100,000, much less, anything else. And it was what fast-tracked my ability to absorb, the nuances that you need to have to be successful in the business.
Yeah, and Eddie was quite a creator and quite a mind, and of course he passed away Super Bowl night, I understand, in 1985, and certainly Mike followed thereafter, and just it seemed like a rash of tragedies in that family, and something that's become kind of epidemic in the United States. How did those deaths affect you, Magnum?
The fact of the matter is, there's mental health challenges, as you said, stated across America, and we live in a very high-profile, business type, situation. So our struggles and things that go on in the wrestling industry, the world sees it as played out. I mean, I was watching the Super Bowl with Dick Slater when I heard about Eddie, and just couldn't believe it. Yeah. And years later, Mike and I were working for WCW together, and I was Dusty's assistant, and Mike was an agent, and countless nights, I listened to Mike just, basically just crying about the loss of his dad, his best friend, and what it had done to him personally, and that loss. So for Mike to have ended up going down that that same path, and his son did as well, it just it tells you that there's a chip, there's something. The Von Erichs, same thing, and our world is so high profile, and so much importance put on perceptions and how the world perceives you and your persona, that when things go awry in that world and suddenly things are out of control and you can no longer be that which you've always measured yourself by, things can fall apart real quickly. And I believe Eddie had something happen that was, potentially going to put him in a very compromised situation that he just couldn't wrap his head around, couldn't cope with. Mike had been hugely successful at different points of time in his life. Remember when he was 30 years old and him and I were, running around together and, big boats and, Rolexes and this and that, the other, and all the things and the accolades that came from being a Graham to, that empire crumbling and humbling yourself to still go out and work hard, but realizing you could never be back where you once were. And all those unmet expectations in life are just so overwhelming for someone's coping skills that there's some challenge there. And it greatly affected me. And I'm thankful that, somehow, God's given me the ability to navigate those things, because I certainly, had something happen to me that could have taken me one way or another.
Sure.
And, and I'm thankful that for me it was a challenge rather than a death sentence.
Yeah.
So, it's terribly impactful and it's sad for the families. It's sad for, his little girl, Nicole, that I still follow on Facebook and interact with and see what's going on in her life. And I remember how special she was to her grandpa, too. I remember being over at Mike's house when he lived on the Fingers there in Tampa, and her doing chin-ups in the doorway, and her dad and grandpa, cheering her on to do things, and just how much life was in that family, and suddenly to be, in such disarray. And talking to, Carrie Von Erich's daughter, hear similar stories of the happy times and all the good things that they got to interact with as a family, but the thing they're remembered for is this tragedy. And it's a shame, because it's not what defines what they were all about. It was horrendous. It's the worst way anybody can think about things ending up. But it wasn't who they were.
Can I interrupt you on that, though?
Yeah.
Do you feel maybe suicide is a selfish performance, though? I understand there's mental health issues, but the people that are involved, like the children you're speaking about, isn't there a form of selfishness behind that?
I can't judge it, because if you're not sitting in the shoes so overwhelmed that you feel like you can't even breathe, or you don't know how you're going to exist for another moment, I can't judge what goes through a man's head. It's easy to say, just totally on paper, absolutely it looks selfish. But for that person, at that moment, all they could see potentially was something they were going to bring on that was going to be far worse than them being left and out of these people's lives. And I don't think the intent at that point is just to escape, to get out of pain. I think in most of those folks' cases, they really thought they were doing someone a favor.
I'll come at a different angle then. He's a friend of yours, close friend of yours. I mean, we had Barry Windham in here, and I asked him the same question. Were you angry at him? Were you angry at Mike? Were you angry at Eddie for doing that?
I don't know if anger is the right word or not. Had it been right there and feel like they misled me and I could have helped and could have helped try to navigate that troubled time, I might have been angry. For me, it was just sadness, and I can see Barry and I have talked about it, and I know the conversations he and Mike had, and Mike had foretold of things that had made Barry feel like that he had the propensity to do that. And Barry was very much of a mindset that he was not going to be an enabler in that way, in any way, shape, or form, and support that as being an option. So for Barry, I could see where there would be an anger because he was on that level of the confrontation, and it would be hard as a man not to take that personally, like almost, how dare you, do this, with all we've been through, and because of our brotherhood and all that. And but for me, it's the sadness because I look at just the heartache and the grief and the loss. My family's everything to me, and I'd fight, through anything imaginable to protect them. And not being there to protect them is the worst thing that you could ever do.
We're going to change gears a little bit. We have a lot of, again, we were talking to you earlier, we were WWE guys. Can't speak for you, Phil, completely, but I was. And the age of cable is where we get to see these other wrestlers doing something totally different and quite incredible. So when we have the former NWA guys, Mid-Atlantic guys in here, there seems to be a mixed bag. And obviously he's your friend and your mentor, Dusty Rhodes, but many of them were under the opinion that Dusty was about Dusty all the time, right? He always found a way to make sure he stayed over no matter at what cost or what price. What's your response to that?
And my response to it is this. Dusty could step outside the box and look at Dusty as a talent, as from Virgil Runnels looking at Dusty Rhodes just like another guy he's got on his roster. Because Dusty made more money booking than he made in the ring. Okay? Straight up. I mean, like triple what he made actually wrestling. And he knew that he was going to get all the squeeze he could get out of all the major players. Now, there's times in his career where, when he was in Florida and they were just shoveling heels at him, building them and then beating them and whatnot, I could understand it. But during my era and my interaction with him, he had invested in me like probably no one else has ever been invested in by one person in this business. The Crockett's told me if I'd leave Mid-South and come to work for them, they'd give me the biggest push anybody had ever got in the wrestling industry. And they made good their word, and Dusty was the one that made them believe in me and told them what he saw in me. And he was pushing me to surpass what he had done. I hadn't done it yet, but the die had been cast. The votes had been cast. It was coming. And so when I went down, there was no plan B. So Dusty was still here at that tip-top level of his ability to perform, and the whole company went into this, we got to grab superstars to bring in to keep this momentum going and all this thing. And so he fell right into that piece of it. Had he been the selfish man that he sometimes portrayed to be, he wouldn't have ever been grooming and pushing me to be where he was pushing me to be. And so no one else had that relationship with him like that to be able to have seen that side of him. Don't get me wrong, I felt many times like he and I were competing because there was times when they could have passed the torch earlier, but I also know that he was trying to build something to a crescendo, to a level, to make something so big that it was just going to send shockwaves across the whole wrestling industry. So I understood it. And for the others, the ones that were trying to be in that top spot and felt like he was holding on a little too long, they have a different story because they were in a different place.
You mentioned a few times, right? We talked about suicide, and you went this horrific accident, and I could imagine the struggles you had to go with and the positivity you brought out. May I ask, was there a thought process that you felt you let down your entire team because of this accident and you might have destroyed everything that they were building?
Hands down. First words I uttered out of my mouth to Dusty and Jim Crockett both was how sorry I was. As I'm laying in a bed, in a rotokinetic bed, paralyzed from my neck down, and all I can think about is I had this whole organization built around pushing me to the moon to be their flagship, to take them to the next level in this battle we're in with the WWF. And it took me a long time to get over that piece of it, because I watched from a hospital bed as they were making moves and doing things that I knew in my head were ultimately going to damage the company out of a reaction.
And that's a tremendous burden. There's a lot of burdens, physically, mentally. So you got to give yourself a lot of props for hanging in there and doing that and becoming the man you are today. It's pretty incredible. So I applaud you for that. I definitely applaud you for that. Can I ask you, was that accident preventable?
Absolutely, hands down. There are very few things in this world that you can categorize as a true accident. Had I been driving slower, it could have still happened, but it wouldn't have been as bad. Had I known to look at my equipment better, I'd have realized that 3/4 of my tire that I couldn't see the way the car was lowered were bald. It only had 8,000 miles on it. And so for the conditions and the weather and everything that was happening, I was driving too fast for the conditions, hands down. Did I constantly go up and down the same stretch of road at much greater rates of speed than I was traveling that night? Absolutely. I was driving slower, much slower than normal, but my much slower than normal was still too fast for those conditions. Had I not been in a little bitty sports car, had I been in a SUV or a big truck, something in which I had headroom and ample protection around me, I wouldn't have got hurt. So there is a whole slew of things, and I've gone on to work in both safety field and quality fields and all kinds of other totally non-related things where I've had to examine those things and really come to terms with the fact that an accident is like an act of God, like a lightning bolt shooting out and striking a tree that falls on your car. That's an accident that you had no way of foreseeing. But if it's pouring down rain, you need to drive with enough precaution to make sure that if you're going, what appears to be a shallow puddle that may cause you to hydroplane, that you got a reasonable chance of coming out of it in one piece.
You mentioned Dark Side of the Ring before. And look, as a wrestling fan, I think we all enjoy Dark Side of the Ring to a certain point. But in some points, I feel like they kind of maybe twist your words or, kind of put things in place. I'm not saying they did that with you, but the one thing I found interesting, and I wanted to know what you were thinking was you had this accident, right? And you're married to your first wife. And, you're going through these struggles, and then she's by your side trying to help mend you through. And then later on in the show, you say, well, I continued to just have extramarital affairs, do that.
No, that she said that.
She did. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So, right. I forgot that.
Yeah.
So I apologize for that. How did that make you feel?
The relationship with her was obviously damaged before all this took place. And after the fact and all the things and whatnot, when you're in the throes of the emotion of the struggle, I was 5 months in a hospital. 5 months. And when all the lights come off and you're no longer in the movie, in all the drama and all the excitement, and you come back head to head and you're looking at each other eyeball to eyeball and trying to decide whether you really even want to be around this particular person or not, things happen. And it happens to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that everyone that doesn't even come from the lifestyle that I came from. And I think the picture was painted a little different from her perspective, because I think a lot of things came to light to her during that whole time that I was in the hospital. And then we came out and we're not, on top of the world anymore, where they don't have the bright future we once had. I think there was a lot of, where the bitterness, maybe the depression, the this, to that, the other, all played into those scenarios. And that's really what the rest of the story that probably wasn't portrayed real well. in that portion of it. But I would never be objectionable to her saying the way it made her feel, because truly she was hurt by the things that happened.
And to be honest, I think it's probably hard for her to look. You're this good-looking guy, super famous. There probably had to be a lot of pressures on her even before your accident, and then to add the accident on, it's
Hands
10
down.
times more, right?
Yeah, you can't serve two masters. And that old rock and roll song about a road, no place to raise a family. With a wrestling business, is no place to be committed in to anything but the thing that you're most passionate about. And what I was most passionate about was being in the industry and all the things that came along with that. And the road life, being on the road 30 and 40, 60 days at a time, in those environments was not conducive to to trying to keep anything together in the way of a long distance relationship. Just wasn't practical. And to tip the whole thing off to the worst it possibly could have been, the moment I got married and came back after the break to the wrestling industry, Bill Watts takes my brand new bride off to the side and says, "Oh, by the way, we're now pushing him as a sex symbol, and you're no longer allowed at any of the buildings anywhere you can go." Where she once traveled with me and went places occasionally and all this stuff, that was all now off limits. So you had to make choices, and some of them aren't pretty, and some of those are preventable, but you would not be able to survive in that fishbowl and not play the part. And it was not just an on-camera role back then. It was the day before kayfabe was broke. If you were that character, you were that character.
But that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, look, you fall in love, you want to get married, right? That's how we're taught, the natural thing to happen. But at that point, you're not Magnum TA, and all of a sudden now you become this icon. At some point, like, maybe I should have held off on the marriage thing a little bit.
And there's things that about the whys and the wherefores and why all that came to be that in retrospect I can say hey that was just a really bad. I could have just said right then, you know what, we probably should just
let's have a long engagement. Let's have a long
yeah. You might just want to rethink this whole thing. How good a deal I am, because I may not be that good a deal.
Take our time.
But but to be fair, it was a horrible position to be in as a woman. And so that's why I really just kind of quiet about her say and her perspective, because there are other perspectives, but there was enough bad done on the front side of that I'll give her that mulligan, because it's not worth it.
Well, I love the fact that you look at both sides of the story, right? I mean, that's what most people should do. They should think about how the other person's feel. It's a great answer, man. It's really, that's why I like Dark Side of the Ring, but there's some points I feel like not everything has to be so dark. How about the good side of the ring once in a while?
The light side.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing with them, and they promised me, and they held true to it, was I didn't want it to be a sad ending story. I wanted it to be a story of adapting and overcoming and moving on to another chapter, rather than what could have been, what should have been, what all that stuff. Fell into He fell into this and that and the other, and just travesty after travesty, and that's not the case. We all have challenges in life, and it's what we do with those challenges that ultimately define us as what kind of legacy we're going to leave. And you can say all these great philosophical things you want, but the proof's in the pudding. What did you really do?
Yeah.
What did you do at the end of the day?
Yeah. Now, for me, these are the things I think about, right? Like, I grew up, I loved wrestling, right? But to me, there's more to it, right? You guys are intelligent, and you really have these incredible lives, and you're just like normal human beings. But, like, I thought to myself, right, you have this, we talked about this small family, right? So you end up meeting the love of your your present wife now. But, obviously, we all know she was married to Tully Blanchard before. So I thought to myself, man, like, what kind of dynamic does that bring? Because you guys worked together, you knew each other. Wow, what kind of dynamic happens there?
and there I raised his 1, 3, 5, and 7-year-old for the next 15 years till they grow up, right? So he and I are so much alike in some ways in that we're both workaholic-minded type people to work towards a goal, be the best we could be. When I met Tully, he had the goal to be the best heel that he possibly could be, wanted to be the best in the world, didn't want to ever be somebody to be cheered. It wasn't one of those heels that secretly wanted to be liked and you have accolades thrown towards him. He wanted to be that nasty heel. And I wanted to be the baby face and do what I did. And we threw that chemistry into what we did, and it worked. And outside the ring, we both had our failures and our things we struggled with and stumbled with and tried to find our way through. But because of the vicinity and the closeness and the group that we all interacted with, when things were going wrong in parallel universes and they're having trouble and I'm in a crossroads, and all of a sudden unlikely people find their way, commiserating about, what's going on. It was a very unlikely situation, but the same things that caused them conflict with each other were a common ground for her and I, and that we found some peace in. And so it was really unlikely. It was bizarre, but to his credit, talk about coping skills. I mean, he navigated his way through the emotional side of that and everything else, and he'd had a failed relationship, which is devastating in and of itself. But then to have his counterpart seemingly pick up the pieces and keep that whole little unit going for 2 decades, and we still coexist in this wrestling universe and go out and talk about the I Quit matches and all that stuff. We still got this uncommon bond, unspoken respect that is so far above and beyond the things that happen down here that it supersedes it. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's very unique, and it wasn't a path that I would have ever figured or prescribed. I mean, I had my first child and thought 1 was enough, and I go from 1 to 5 to 7 and like bing bang boom. Wow. At at a very odd stage of my life, and here at 64 years old have 16-year-old twins. So go figure.
Incredible. Wow.
Magnum, some of the pressures you faced as a star, and as many of them face today, was keeping a good physique. And I understand that Bruiser Brody gave you some advice years ago. Is that true?
He saved my life.
Okay.
He absolutely, completely, hands down, saved my life. I was in San Antonio, Texas. Ray Hercules Hernandez had just come in from Florida. He had a bag of performance-enhancing elements that was like the size of a grocery bag, and I at that time thought that I wanted to be as big as the Road Warriors, and I was like a 230-pound guy, and so Ray and I started working out together, and I got up to 270, and Ray got up to about the same in a very short period of time, and I walked in a dressing room, and Bruiser Brody saw me come through the door, and he said, "Man, you look amazing." And and of course that boosted my ego, and I felt good, and I'm all jacked up. He said, "But I want to tell you something. If you become a star and become successful because of just the way you look and the size that you carry, and you have to do something year-round to maintain that size, then you have just written your own epitaph, because it will take you out."
Yeah.
And the light bulb just went off in my head. And he said, "Learn your craft, learn your trade, find a way that you can reasonably maintain the best version of yourself that you can, and you'll have a long career." And I mean, I just, like I said, because I was going to 300 pounds come hell or high water, and I was on my way. And I said, that is the best advice I've ever heard in my life from this big monster of a man who had taken a liking to me for some reason.
Yeah.
And Frank and I maintained amazing friendship after that, and And he did. It changed the whole forecast of the way I looked at the business and what I wanted to become, and the way I, didn't go down that road of I've got to be jacked to the gills to be the best version of me that someone will buy and want to see.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing.
When you first got to the studio, we were talking about the signings you were just at and how this wrestling thing has evolved with all these signings and everything else. And I was thinking about, obviously, your career and where you were. And at the time, I think Flair was champion. If this accident doesn't take place, clearly you were going to become the new heavyweight champion. Do you think Ric Flair's historic story of this iconic wrestler remains the same, or does he get pushed into the oblivion?
Well, I'll blow your mind worse than that. What would Sting have been?
Yes.
Forget Rick. What would Sting, where would he have rolled into the game, right?
That's why you're smarter than me, man. I wasn't even thinking about that.
Because Lex Luger, Sting, the Road Warriors, Barry Windham, they all got these big money contracts after I crash and burn. Nikita gets turned babyface. He gets a huge, bajillion-dollar contract. And the world that I lived in was measured off the work and the lineage and the history and the Harley Races of the world and the Dory Funks and the Jack Briscoes and the men that had made, wrestling what it was. And we were going in a toe-to-toe battle against New York to give a better bell-time to bell-time product than anybody in the industry. They were entertainment, we were wrestling. And we were fighting out there tooth and nail to bring that product out. So my question would be, how would that landscape would have changed? And Ric Flair is one of the greatest performers to ever lace up a pair of boots. I'll never ever say Rick would not have been umpteen world time champion and whatnot. He and I may have traded it back and forth, where we, a whole bunch, and he may have jumped ship and gone to the WWE way sooner, and the Crockett's may still have crashed, and I may have gone to the WWE. Because truth be known, Andre the Giant, that gave me that name, wanted me to go to the WWE before I ever went to Mid-South, before any of that ever happened. His game plan for me was to go to work for the WWE from day one. So it all happened, for a reason, played out like it did. And I like to think that all that talent would have found its way through and still made something of herself and had opportunities, but it would have looked different.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Nikita Koloff. Tell me about the man Nikita Koloff and the friend Nikita Koloff.
Well, he and I shared what was really the defining moment of my career, first of all. The feud I had with him was the first time that I was the senior member in the ring. I was the general. I was the one that was going to make sure that this angle lived up to the hype, that we could go out there and have the kind of matches that I expected and that the fans expected. And we had one heck of a run for a number of months. So when I go down and they turn him babyface, and I'm watching from afar because I'm still not engaged in the game in any way, shape, or form, I thought it was a moment of brilliance that that Dusty did the switch on him, but it did him the most disservice professionally that anything could have ever had to him. And I say this for this reason. He was built to such a mega heel and had been taken care of and groomed by people like myself and people like Dusty that had worked with him and continued to make him this monster, that when he turned babyface, he didn't have the other side of the fence, those people still keeping him to maintain that ferocity as a babyface that he has as a heel. He became a softer version of himself that wasn't as marketably palatable to the wrestling fan as he was when he was that monster. And it was a quick fix, but in the long term, it wasn't the best thing could have happened in his career. Best thing that could have happened was he and I to have taken that feud again when I was the world champion, and him and I battling all over America, with him chasing for the world title.
I mean, even with that, when he turns face, it seems like he also changed certain other things. He didn't look like he was probably hitting the gas as much as he was as a heel, right?
No, and he got married. He was married to Mandy, his first wife, who passed away from Hodgkin's, and when she got sick and things started spiraling that were outside of his control, a lot of things started going on in his mind, and he and I never had the conversation about the gas and dropping down from 295 to whatever he eventually went down to, but when the fans look at that, they don't understand all that, and they just see somebody that was once a monster is now a lesser version of that, and it loses some of its impact. But beyond all that, he and I developed just this tremendous bond outside the ring, mutual respect for each other that had started there, this carried into a lifetime of friendship. He and I have been on many occasions spoken at churches and different facilities together and shared our stories and common feelings about our paths, and he's just a pretty remarkable guy all the way around, way larger than that once fearsome the guy that he was in the ring. He's impacted the world on a much larger capacity today than he ever did in the wrestling circle.
When you were in the hospital, of course, there was that After magazine that had him on the cover. Do you remember? It said,
Yeah, I have
the
cried
tear.
tear for.
I cried.
Yeah.
Yes, a classic, and that helped start the process going. But he was still a heel at the time of your accident, and I know a lot of the guys came to visit you. Did they have to sneak him in at all to keep cover?
Nikita didn't come in then.
Okay.
Nikita was in Japan
Okay.
when I had the accident.
I see.
So they brought Arn and Rick and Tully and I don't remember who else. They brought him up a freight elevator
Okay.
to get into the ICU
Sure.
because they didn't know whether I was going to make it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very touch and go. And Rick laid the 10 pounds of gold belt on my chest in the hospital, not the big belt as depicted in the wrestling show. It was the old 10 pounds of gold,
The classic belt.
the classic
Yeah.
belt, laid it on my chest, and he said, I'm giving you this one, and when you're ready, come to the ring, and I'll give you the old one.
That's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gesture.
Little Patty out there is just asking, she's your biggest fan, he's your biggest fan ever. He wants to know if you like Journey.
That's funny. Yeah, I do. I do like Journey.
Listen, I want to thank you taking your time out of your very busy schedule. What an incredible interview, incredible human being.
Inspiration, man.
I'm going to hit you with something. My partner in Florida used to have something called the Pharaoh's Final Question. I'm going to call this Phil's Final Question, where it's unscripted. Whatever comes to his mind, he may ask you if you like Iron Maiden. I don't know. We'll see. Phil?
All right. Well, I'm going to pull one right out of the ether here.
Go ahead.
I noticed a similarity in boots between a few of the wrestlers. I know Barry Windham has a styled boot, kind of a, I don't want to say a cowboyish boot or what have you, but I think you wore those as well, did you not? In-ring boots, and any reason behind them?
It was Dusty. Well, we all envisioned ourselves, or at least Dusty and I and Barry, we all had this envisionment that we were some kind of reincarnated cowboy outlaws, something, I don't know what.
Like the James Boys.
And well, we were the James
You were the
Boys.
James
Make
Boys.
no
I know
bones
that.
about that.
Oh, I know that.
But Dusty is the one that turned me on to the Austin Hall Boot Company that made those famous boots.
They're sweet, yeah.
Blackjack Mulligan wore them.
Yep.
Bobby Duncombe wore
Big
them.
Bad
I mean,
Bobby,
it was a host of people that wore them, but they were iconic.
Yeah.
And I had gone to a pull-on pair of boots when I first came there, but they were crafted up by another bootmaker, and they weren't nearly the ornate inlay and all the things that Austin Hall was able to do. So he's the one that turned me on to it, and you had to really like that, because to be able to work in that, jump,
Yeah.
leapfrog, and drop kick and jump off the top rope and not break your ankles, you had to kind of be a certain kind of cat to do that.
Yeah.
And
You
I
were.
was able to do it.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. Amazing.
Well done, sir. I want to thank everybody for joining us in this special episode with the great Magnum T. We'll be back in, I think, a half an hour with the Nasty Boys. Very busy night. Thank you all again for joining us. This is Mike Monte.
And Phil DeCesare.
It's #1 Pro Wrestling broadcast until 6:30. See ya.
See ya.